All right, switching gears a little bit, hang on. We have a case. We have a 35-year-old male complaining of nausea and vomiting, abdominal and chest cramping and pain. The patient is diaphoretic, they're sweating. They have a heart rate of 100, blood pressure of 124/78. Their oxygen saturation is 96% on room air. No previous medical history, no known drug allergies. Began 20 minutes ago while this person was cleaning weeds in their yard. So, if I were to tell you that a 35-year-old male was complaining of nausea and vomiting, abdominal and chest cramping and pain, what would you think it could be? So I would think of initially 35 years old, heart attack? Probably not, maybe, could be. Genetics, maybe they're really obese. Nausea and vomiting, bit of a concern. Chest cramping, definitely a concern. Maybe it's a respiratory thing happening. Maybe it's anaphylaxis, nausea and vomiting, chest cramping, potentially. So there's a lot of things that this could be. But in reality, what this case happens to be, is that this person was bit by a black widow spider. So let's talk about black widow spiders. So 32 species worldwide. Females are, the typical appearance with the red on the back or on the stomach. Generally not actually all that aggressive. The whole sexual cannibalism thing, actually usually observed only in lab cages where the males couldn't escape. So something to think about as well. Random facts. Distribution map, this is why I'm including it in this lecture, because these things are really all over the world, except in Canada. So, have fun climbing and skiing and whatever up there. All right, so incidents and what we see, over 800 a year of these are reported to poison control centers and emergency departments across the United States. There's probably way, way more than that, but a lot of people probably actually don't go in and seek treatment for this. So no deaths reported since the 1950s. These don't really kill people. There is an antivenom for it. We'll talk about that in a second. Large study, 24,000 bites reported to poison control centers. This study was done a few years ago. Minor effects, 65%, nausea and vomiting, cramping, things like that. Moderate effects, 34%. Where they had to stay in the hospital for a little while. Major being 1%, that being life-threatening or causing some type of residual disability long-term. So we don't see a lot of issues with this. You're probably asking yourself, wow, that's a really cool-looking spider on that outhouse, but the reason why that's in here is that one of the most common areas for males to have a black widow spider bite is, you can probably guess where this is going, in the latrine, sitting down, there's a spider. So hover, remember that. All right, so they carry a toxin, latrotoxin, and this causes really a massive release of neurotransmitters within the body, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, GABA, dopamine. It acts on muscles directly, essentially preventing relaxation. So you're going to have this really fast muscle twitch contraction, and then some relaxation as well. It tends to come and go. We see that most often kind of in the abdominal area, but it can go to the chest. It can certainly go to the neck, up into the jaw as well. So the presentation can be quite scary for people having this. And they have pain, muscle rigidity, sometimes vomiting as well. You can see there's a lot of different species of, I'm trying to figure out which way this camera points, of the black widow spider. It's horrible looking. So what do we see with this? Other symptoms: tremors, weakness, shaking of the extremities, fasciculations, which is if you ever have a muscle just start to twitch randomly, that's a fasciculation. Has definitely been mistaken for a variety of abdominal surgical emergencies. People have actually been taken into surgery. Wow, we don't know what's going on, your CT is not showing anything, we got to do exploratory surgery. Turns out they were bit by a black widow. So something to keep in mind as well. Typically resolves within 24 to 72 hours. So if you can just kind of grunt it out and be okay with all the pain and the muscle cramping and all of that, it should kind of self-resolve. So if you're in an extended backcountry environment, that's some peace of mind about that. Your differential, which essentially is what you think it could be, should be based on a couple of things. So a diagnosis can only really be made for black widow spider bites if both of the following occur. So a spider was observed actually inflicting the bite, or the spider was recovered, collected, and identified. So if you have somebody complaining of muscle tightness, abdominal tightness, nausea and vomiting, it could be some GI distress, could be a lot of other things going on. So don't narrow into that right away. We have to rule out other things. And in a backcountry environment, if you have the black widow spider, or you saw that it was a black widow spider that bit you, then fantastic, you know what that is. But if you don't have that, then you really have to be concerned about a lot of other things, and you really need to evacuate that person to a medical center. Okay, so let's talk about treatment. So symptoms will self-resolve within hours to days. Talked about that. Really, if you can just kind of write it out, you'll most likely be okay. But certainly if you can get the person to a hospital, or if this just happens at your home in an urban area, I would definitely go to the hospital, because you will get a lot of comfort care in the form of narcotics in opiate pain management. And really that tends to work out best for these spider bites. If you're happen to be a person with some medical experience, you may have heard of this calcium gluconate thing. Turns out it doesn't work at all. Large study on that done quite a few years ago, so no need to think about that. Really, just pain management, rest is what these patients need. Okay, so antivenom for black widow spider bites, very somewhat uncommon to potentially give this. It does exist within the United States. Definitely more common for the redback black widow spider, which is found in Australia. Used for high-risk patients, very young, very elderly who are at risk. Used more for those patients. The problem is it's derived from a horse protein, which puts people more at risk for having anaphylaxis when they're given the antivenom. Pretty profoundly so. 1 out of 58 had some type of allergic reaction in a 2011 study. So, most people do okay without the antivenom, just with narcotic pain management. Brown widow, common in the United States, less potent venom, can still cause an issue. Just thought I'd mention that as well. And now let's talk about scorpions. Hope you're writing this stuff down. Here we go. So prevalence, 1,000 plus known species of scorpions across the world. Only 25 have venom that is actually deadly to humans. That is a horrible photo. Scorpions. Okay, so mostly belonging to one specific family. 5,000 deaths worldwide annually. Don't see those deaths really here in the United States all that much at all. So you're probably asking yourself, well, like I live in an area and I've seen scorpions, so what are those types of scorpions that can actually be an issue? They can be poisonous, they can be poisonous to people. So the one that we're really worried about here in the United States, if you're going to other parts in the world, different story, do your research beforehand. But here in the US, we have what's called the bark scorpion. The bark scorpion is named that primarily because it resides near the base of trees, near the bark of trees. 4 to 6 centimeters long, pretty tiny little thing, found in Arizona, places in New Mexico, West Texas, Southern California, and the Lake Mead area in Nevada. So that's really where you'll see these things. So the interesting thing about this scorpion is that it can cause, essentially it has a neurotoxin, so it can cause severe pain, numbness, tingling, vomiting. People commonly report like electrical volts, sounds like it feels like there's lightning or electrical volts in their body. Ultimately, it can cause respiratory dysfunction lasting between 24 to 72 hours, and that can be very profound, so much so that they need to go to a hospital. Even with that being said, fatalities are quite rare in the US. Small fatalities from things like pets, kids, elderly, and adults with compromised immune systems who can't handle that insult to their body. But really, we don't see people dying from this a whole lot whatsoever. So the big thing is really recognition of what's going on. Yeah, they were bit by a scorpion. We're going to monitor the bite. We're going to see if there's any systemic signs and symptoms, and then go from there. But the venom is interesting. It's a complex mix of histamine and neurotoxins. Really, the neurotoxins incomplete activation of your sodium channels during depolarization, that being firing of actual muscle. This results in kind of this slow inward current of sodium, which ends up basically causing this kind of repetitive, uncontrolled firing of axons, which is your muscle fibers. And so you have these kind of repetitive muscle firing throughout your body, these electrical volts, signs and symptoms happening. Extreme reactions can be numbness, paralysis, seizures, coma, things like that. So 2 recorded fatalities in Arizona since 1968. Not something that we really see a whole lot. And thousands of people are estimated to actually be stung by these in Arizona each year. Now, one little caveat on the bark scorpion. What can actually happen after you're bit by a bark scorpion, weeks after, days and weeks after? You can develop acute pancreatitis. Usually self-resolves, but anybody with pancreatitis usually needs to be admitted to a hospital. It tends to be a very severe thing and can have some really pretty big complications, so inflammation of your pancreas. So if you are bit by a bark scorpion, something that you should be potentially worried about is pancreatitis. Tap test, interesting thing. Also, if you ever get a black light and shine it in the desert at night, you can freak yourself out and find some scorpions. So tap test, empirically recommended, not actually fully backed up by a good research study, but essentially with the person looking away, you tap where their scorpion sting was at, and that should produce kind of an overwhelming, like they're going to almost scream in pain. And that tends to be very, very evident if it is a bark scorpion, but not other type of scorpion bites or bug bites. So kind of an interesting little thing there. Let's see here. So antivenom developed at Arizona University shortens duration of the symptoms. The production ceased in 2000. Doesn't exist. So really we can't do a whole lot for these patients besides control their pain. Sometimes if it's very severe, they'll be admitted to an intensive care unit, and they'll try to help them through their issues there. All right, so that's pretty much it. Bark scorpion, not a whole lot to be worried about. If it does happen, monitor the patient, potentially get them to a hospital for some pain management, but not a whole lot you can do for the bark scorpion itself. Other scorpions, really crazy looking things, Middle East, Africa, powerful neurotoxins will make people stop breathing. These are some serious situations. We don't see this in the US at all, unless if you happen to have a friend who likes exotic pets, and people keep these things in the US all the time. So keep that in mind as well. The death stalker, green looking scorpion found in Egypt, Sudan, Afghanistan, very powerful neurotoxin once again. So try to stay away from these things. All right, so finishing up here, last little bit on the brown recluse. I literally just have one slide on it. And the reason why I have one slide is because we should go down to the last point here on treatment, is that really the bites are self-limited. They heal without really any medical intervention. You can certainly go see a clinician if you are worried about a wound that starts to really look like this. So essentially what happens is that the bite will start to have this kind of ulcerative kind of dead tissue that just starts to kind of spread. Usually it limits itself, it stops at some point, but you can certainly see people with very profound, awful looking brown recluse bites like that. So what you'll see as a presentation is you're bit by something. Initially it just looks like a bug bite. It's not going away. It actually gets bigger and bigger and bigger and starts to become kind of this nasty open looking wound thing. And essentially you just need to keep it clean, and usually it will heal itself on its own in good time. It could become infected. Sometimes they'll give you antibiotics, but the antibiotics won't actually treat the actual bug bite itself. It would only treat an infection if an infection were to truly develop there. Steroids and other things have been given for these brown recluse bites, and none of them work. So really you can't do a whole lot for these things. 49% of bites do not result in necrosis, so that's the other thing to keep in mind. You can certainly be bit by one of these and not develop tissue necrosis as well. They're not aggressive, the brown recluse, at all, which is why they're called the recluse. There's actually been houses that people have studied where these brown recluses have been completely infested inside these houses, inside the walls and everywhere, and they're so reclusive that there's like large families living in these houses, and there's been no reported bites from brown recluses. So we don't see these things a whole lot, and there's your distribution map of where they're at here in the United States.